Sarah Mitchell's hands froze on the radio transmitter, her breath catching in her throat as the desperate whimpering echoed through the humid Florida swampland. The sound wasn't human. It was something far more heartbreaking. 20 yards ahead, coiled around the small black form struggling weakly against death, was 18 feet of pure nightmare. Martha Henderson's walking stick clattered to the muddy ground. "Sweet Jesus," the 78-year-old whispered, her weathered hand clutching her chest. "That's our hope." The 6-month-old bear cub Sarah had bottle-fed, the one who had slept curled against her grief-stricken heart for months, was trapped in the crushing embrace of a Burmese python. Hope's dark eyes, usually bright with intelligence, were glazing over as the massive serpent tightened its deadly grip with each labored breath. "Jake, we need that cold spray now!" Sarah's voice cracked into the radio, her surgeon's training warring with a mother's panic. How long did they have before Hope's ribs cracked? Before her heart stopped beating? And why did losing this little soul feel exactly like losing David all over again? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Sarah Mitchell had arrived in the Florida Everglades carrying nothing but a duffel bag, a broken heart, and the crushing weight of a mother's guilt. At 52, the former pediatric surgeon from Boston looked like a woman who had aged a decade in 3 years. Her auburn hair, once meticulously maintained, now hung in a simple ponytail streaked with premature gray. The laugh lines around her green eyes had deepened into permanent worry creases. The modest research cabin she rented sat on the edge of civilization, where Spanish moss draped ancient cypress trees like funeral shrouds. Sarah had chosen this isolation deliberately. Here, surrounded by the primal sounds of the swamp, she could finally breathe without feeling David's absence in every corner of their former life. Her neighbors were few and far between, but Martha Henderson had made it her mission to check on that sad young woman from up north. Martha, 78 and stubborn as a mule, lived in a weather-beaten house that had belonged to her late husband, Colonel William Henderson. Every morning she'd walk the quarter-mile to Sarah's cabin with fresh coffee and unsolicited wisdom. "Grief ain't something you get over, honey," Martha would say, settling her arthritic bones into the porch rocker. "It's something you learn to carry different." Sarah's official work involved studying invasive species' impact on native wildlife, but her real mission was simpler: to find a reason to wake up each morning. The Everglades offered harsh beauty and dangerous solitude, perfect for someone trying to outrun memories of birthday parties never celebrated and bedtime stories never finished. Jake Morrison operated differently. At 45, he moved through the swamp with the confidence of someone born to navigate its treacherous waters. His weathered face told the story of a man who'd made terrible mistakes and spent years trying to atone for them. As the region's premier python removal specialist, Jake had built a reputation for handling the most dangerous situations that others wouldn't touch. What people didn't know was that Jake carried his own burden. 5 years earlier, his exotic animal business had supplied a young Burmese python to a family in Homestead. That python had grown beyond their expectations and killed 4-year-old Emma Rodriguez while she slept. The lawsuit had destroyed Jake financially, but the guilt had destroyed something deeper. Now he spent his days removing the descendants of snakes he'd once sold, each capture a small act of penance. His truck was equipped with specialized cooling equipment, tranquilizer gear, and a satellite phone that connected him to wildlife emergencies across South Florida. Local authorities called him for the impossible cases, the 20-foot monsters that had claimed territory in golf courses and suburban backyards. None of them could have predicted that their 3 separate paths of guilt, grief, and redemption would converge around one extraordinary bear cub. Hope had wandered into their lives like a small miracle wrapped in black fur, carrying secrets that would challenge everything they thought they knew about second chances and the bonds between species. In the humid embrace of America's last great wilderness, healing would require more courage than any of them imagined. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the mist when Sarah discovered Hope's favorite resting spot empty, the hollow beneath the ancient cypress where the bear cub always waited for their dawn ritual stood vacant, disturbed earth the only evidence of her presence. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she called Hope's name, the sound echoing uselessly across the water. "Hope! Hope! Where are you, baby girl?" This wasn't like Hope. In the 6 months since Martha had bottle-fed the orphaned cub back to health, the little bear had never strayed far from the familiar territory around their cabins. She was too smart, too cautious, too aware of the dangers lurking in the deeper swamp. Sarah's radio crackled to life. "Sarah, honey, you need to get over here right now." Martha's voice carried an urgency that made Sarah's blood run cold. She found Martha standing in her kitchen, staring out the window toward the tree line with binoculars pressed to her eyes. The older woman's hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from something that looked like fear. "What is it, Martha?" "Government types," Martha said grimly, not lowering the binoculars. 3 vehicles, black SUVs with those little antennas, showed up about an hour before dawn. They had equipment, Sarah. Tranquilizer guns, cages, some kind of tracking gear. Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. Tracking gear? They knew exactly where they were going, headed straight toward Dead Man's Creek like they'd been there before. Martha finally turned to face her, and Sarah saw decades of military wife instincts sharp in the old woman's eyes. They weren't looking for just any animal, honey. They were looking for our Hope. The implications crashed over Sarah like a cold wave. Hope wasn't just any bear cub. Her intelligence, her uncanny ability to understand human emotion, her gentle nature that defied every textbook about wild animal behavior, it had all seemed like a miracle. Now it felt like a curse. Sarah's hands shook as she grabbed her emergency pack. "Did you see which direction they went?" "Southeast, toward the old research station." Martha was already pulling on her hiking boots despite being 78 years old. "Don't even think about telling me to stay behind. That little gal saved my life when I had my heart attack last month. She stayed with me for 6 hours, kept me warm until you found us. Time I returned the favor." Sarah wanted to argue, but she'd learned that Martha Henderson was immovable when her mind was set. Besides, Martha knew the swamp better than anyone. Her late husband had been stationed here during some classified military operation decades ago. They were loading supplies into Sarah's airboat when Jake Morrison's truck rumbled down the dirt road. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Jake's expertise could be invaluable, but something about his timing felt too convenient. "Heard chatter on the emergency frequency," Jake said, climbing out of his truck. "Multiple agencies coordinating a capture operation. Figured you might need help." "You know about this?" Sarah demanded. Jake's weathered face was unreadable. "Know about what?" "All I heard was something about a priority wildlife retrieval in Sector 7. That's Hope's territory, isn't it?" Martha studied Jake with the intensity of someone who'd spent 50 years reading people. "Mighty coincidental, you showing up just when our girl goes missing?" "Look, Mrs. Henderson, I've got as much reason to protect that bear as you do." Jake's voice carried a sincerity that was hard to fake. "She's special. Anyone with eyes can see that. If someone's trying to take her, then we need to move fast." Sarah found herself caught between suspicion and desperation. Hope could be suffering right now, confused and terrified in some cage. Every minute they spent debating was another minute the little bear was in danger. Dead Man's Creek, Sarah decided. If that's where the government vehicles went, that's where we start. As they loaded into Jake's larger swamp boat, better equipped for the dangerous waters ahead, Sarah caught Martha whispering what sounded like a prayer. The old woman's fingers worried the small cross pendant she always wore, a habit Sarah had noticed during times of stress. "What are you praying for, Martha?" "For wisdom, honey, and for strength." Martha's blue eyes met Sarah's. "Because I got a feeling we're about to learn some things about our hope that we might not be ready for." The boat's engine roared to life, drowning out Sarah's response. As they headed into the maze of waterways leading to the abandoned research facility, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing towards something much larger than a simple animal rescue. Hope's disappearance felt like the first domino in a sequence that would change all their lives forever. Behind them, morning mist rose from the water like ghosts of secrets waiting to be uncovered. The abandoned research facility emerged from the swamp like a forgotten tomb. Concrete walls, stained green with decades of moisture and moss, rose from murky water that had long since reclaimed the lower levels. Rusted chain-link fences hung in tatters, and warning signs in multiple languages had faded to ghostly whispers of their former authority. Jake cut the engine as they approached the crumbling dock. The silence that followed felt oppressive, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk and the gentle lap of water against rotting pilings. Sarah studied the facility through binoculars, noting fresh tire tracks in the mud and the unmistakable marks of recent human activity. "This place gives me the shivers," Martha whispered, but her voice carried something deeper than simple unease. "William used to have nightmares about this place." "Your husband worked here?" Sarah asked, lowering her binoculars. Martha nodded slowly. "Back in the 70s. Some kind of classified research project. He never talked about it much, but toward the end, when the cancer was eating at his brain, he'd wake up screaming about the animals and what they did to make them that way." Jake's head snapped up from securing the boat lines. "What kind of animals?" "All kinds. Bears, dolphins, even some primates." Martha's weathered hands gripped the boat's rail. "William said they were trying to make them smarter, more human-like. Said it was supposed to help with medical research, but something went wrong. Real wrong." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. Hope's extraordinary intelligence, her almost human-like responses to emotion, her ability to understand complex instructions, suddenly it all took on a sinister new meaning. They made their way carefully across the unstable dock and into the facility's main building. Emergency lighting flickered intermittently, powered by some unseen generator. The corridors reeked of mold and decades of neglect, but underneath lay something else, the sharp, clinical smell of recent disinfectant. "Someone's been cleaning up," Jake observed, running his finger along a wall that should have been covered in grime. They found the laboratory on the 3rd floor. Unlike the rest of the building, this room was spotless. Modern computer equipment hummed quietly on sterile metal tables, and banks of monitors displayed what looked like tracking data. But it was the wall of photographs that made Sarah's knees go weak. Dozens of animals stared back at them from the images: bears, wolves, dolphins, even a few big cats. Each photograph was labeled with dates, locations, and, most chilling of all, intelligence quotient ratings. At the center of the display, in a place of honor, was Hope. The photograph showed her as she looked now, not as the tiny cub Martha had found. Someone had been watching Hope for months, documenting her behavior, measuring her responses. Written beneath her picture in clinical handwriting were the words, "Subject 7 Alpha, IQ equivalent 85 and 90. Emotional attachment level extreme, priority acquisition." "Sweet Jesus," Martha breathed. "They've been studying our baby like she's some kind of experiment." Jake was examining a stack of papers on one of the tables. His face had gone pale. "Sarah, you need to see this." The documents were procurement orders, shipping manifests, and what appeared to be contracts with various research institutions, but the header on each page made Sarah's world crash down around her. Mitchell Pediatric Research Foundation, Genetic Memory Enhancement Program. "That's my maiden name," Sarah whispered, "before I married David's father." Martha's sharp intake of breath drew their attention to another wall display. This one showed a family tree of genetic connections, with Hope's lineage traced through multiple generations. At the very top of the chart was a name that made Sarah's vision blur: David Mitchell, aged 8, deceased. "They used my son," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "Somehow they used David in their experiments." Jake's radio crackled to life with an incoming transmission. A cold, professional voice filled the silence. "Morrison, this is Dr. Webb. I trust you've located our asset by now. Time is running short, and my investors are becoming impatient." The blood drained from Sarah's face as she stared at Jake. "You're working for them." Jake's expression crumbled. "Sarah, I can explain. You betrayed us." Sarah backed toward the door, Martha close behind her. "You led us here while they took Hope." "No, you don't understand." Jake dropped the radio and raised his hands. "Yes, I was hired to find her, but that was before I knew what they really wanted. Before I understood what Hope means to you." "Means to me?" Sarah's voice rose to a dangerous pitch. "She's all I have left of my son, and you've sold her to the same monsters who killed him." Martha stepped between them, her small frame somehow commanding in the sterile room. "Both of you, stop it right now. Fighting each other won't save Hope." Jake's radio crackled again. "Morrison, respond immediately or face the consequences. You have 30 minutes to deliver the specimen to coordinates 25.7617 Yishen, 80.3556 Dagibawu. Do not disappoint me again." "Again?" Sarah's eyes blazed. "How many other families have you destroyed, Jake?" The weight of his secrets finally broke Jake's resolve. 5 years ago, I sold a python to a family in Homestead. That python killed a 4-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez." His voice cracked. "She was in the same class as your David." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not only had Jake betrayed them, but he was also connected to the chain of events that had led to David's death. Her son had been running from one of Jake's pythons when he fell into the lake. Outside, the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder. The sound of rotor blades thundered overhead as 3 black helicopters circled the abandoned facility like mechanical vultures. Sarah pressed herself against the laboratory window, watching armed personnel rappel down ropes with military precision. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the reality of their situation crashed down. They were trapped. "We need to get out of here now," Jake said, frantically gathering the documents from the desk. "Dr. Webb doesn't just want Hope. Anyone who's seen this evidence is a liability." "Don't you dare give me orders," Sarah spat, her green eyes blazing with fury. "You're the reason we're in this mess. You're the reason my son is dead, and now you've led them straight to Hope." Martha grabbed both of them by the arms with surprising strength. "Listen to me, you 2 stubborn fools. That little bear is out there somewhere, scared and alone, while we're in here playing the blame game. William always said that when you're outnumbered and outgunned, you don't fight the war they want you to fight." Heavy boots echoed in the corridor below. Voices barked orders in military cadence, coordinating a systematic search of the building. Sarah estimated they had maybe 5 minutes before the sweep reached the 3rd floor. "There's a service tunnel," Jake said quietly. William mentioned it once when he was having one of his episodes, said it connected to the old generator building about half a mile north. "You knew my husband?" Martha's voice carried a dangerous edge. "He saved my life once, during a python removal gone wrong. Talked about this place, about the guilt he carried." Jake's weathered face crumpled. "Said some sins follow you to the grave." Sarah wanted to maintain her anger, to nurse the righteous fury that had sustained her through 3 years of grief. But hope was still out there, and every minute they spent in conflict was another minute the little bear remained in danger. "Show us the tunnel," she said through gritted teeth. They found the entrance hidden behind a false panel in what had once been a supply closet. The passage was narrow and slick with moisture, forcing them to crawl single file through decades of accumulated grime. Martha, despite her age, moved with the determined grace of someone who had endured harder things than a muddy tunnel. "My William crawled through here 50 years ago," she panted, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Said it was how the scientists escaped when the project went bad, when the animals started dying." 20 minutes later, they emerged into the generator building, gasping in the humid afternoon air. Sarah's research clothes were ruined, caked with mud and torn from the concrete, but she barely noticed. Through gaps in the corrugated walls, she could see search teams methodically combing the main facility. Jake consulted a handheld GPS device. "The coordinates Dr. Webb gave me are about 3 miles southeast. If they have hope, that's where she'll be." "And you're just going to hand her over?" Sarah's voice was thick with disgust. "No." Jake's response was quiet but firm. "That was before I knew what she meant to you, before I understood what they really did to create her." He pulled out his cell phone and showed them a series of text messages. The conversation made Sarah's stomach churn. "Webb, specimen secured, prep for immediate transport." Webb, surgical procedures begin at 1800 hours. Webb, Mitchell woman becoming problematic. Eliminate if necessary. "Surgical procedures?" Martha whispered. Jake's face had gone ashen. "Dr. Webb specializes in neurological research. He's been trying to replicate whatever made Hope so intelligent. The only way to do that is—" "Dissection," Sarah finished, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. "They're going to cut her brain apart to see what makes her special." The implications hit her like a freight train. Hope wasn't just intelligent because of some accident of nature or unusual upbringing. She was the product of experiments that had used David's genetic material, somehow incorporating her son's capacity for empathy and learning into the bear cub's developing brain. Killing Hope would be like losing David all over again. Martha pulled a weathered photograph from her wallet, William in his army uniform, young and proud. "My husband spent 40 years carrying guilt about what happened in this place, said they were trying to help soldiers with brain injuries, trying to find ways to transfer memories and skills between minds." Her voice grew harder. "But they used children's minds as templates. Children who were dying of cancer, children whose parents thought they were helping medical research." "David had leukemia," Sarah whispered. "Dr. Webb was his oncologist. He said the blood draws were for monitoring his treatment. They harvested neural patterns," Martha continued, "stored them somehow, then tried to implant them in animals. Most of the subjects died, but a few survived. Hope was one of them." Jake's radio crackled with another transmission. "All units, we have confirmation that the Mitchell woman and her companions have escaped the facility. Consider them armed and dangerous. Shoot to kill if they interfere with the specimen recovery." "They're not even pretending anymore," Jake said grimly. "We're witnesses to something they can't afford to let live." Sarah felt something shift inside her, the same cold focus that had gotten her through medical school, through David's cancer treatment, through the worst days of grief. "Then we make them pay." "All of them." "Sarah," Martha started. "No, Martha. They took my son's memories, his gentleness, his capacity for love, and they put it into that little bear. Hope carries the best parts of David inside her." Sarah's voice grew steady and dangerous. "I won't let them destroy him twice." Jake studied her face, seeing something there that reminded him of his own moment of reckoning 5 years ago. "What do you want to do?" "We're going to that rendezvous point. We're going to get Hope back. And then we're going to make sure Dr. Webb and his people can never hurt another child again." 3 of us against a private army? Jake shook his head. "Sarah, I know you're hurting, but this is suicide." Martha stood up with the creaking dignity of age and opened a canvas bag she'd been carrying. Inside were items that made both Sarah and Jake stare. Military-grade communication equipment, night vision goggles, and something that looked suspiciously like plastic explosives. "William left me more than just memories," Martha said with a grim smile. "He left me insurance. Been saving it for 50 years, waiting for the right cause." "Martha, you can't," Sarah began. "Honey, I'm 78 years old. I've got arthritis, diabetes, and a heart that's held together with prayers and stubbornness. But that little bear gave me purpose when I thought my life was over. She reminded me what it means to love something purely, completely, without reservation." Martha's blue eyes blazed with fierce determination. "I'm not going to let them turn that love into another one of their experiments." Outside, the search helicopters were expanding their pattern, moving closer to the generator building. Time was running out, and Hope was running out of time, too. Sarah looked at her unlikely allies, a guilt-ridden animal dealer and a septuagenarian widow with a bag full of military secrets, and realized they might be Hope's only chance. "All right," Sarah said. "But we do this my way. No unnecessary risks. We get Hope and we get out." "And Dr. Webb?" Jake asked. Sarah's smile was cold as winter morning. "Dr. Webb is about to learn what happens when you take everything from someone who has nothing left to lose." As they prepared to leave the generator building, Martha grabbed Sarah's hand. "Honey, you need to understand something. If Hope really does carry parts of David inside her, then saving her isn't just about the bear. It's about saving the last piece of your boy that still exists in this world." The weight of that truth settled around Sarah like a mantle. Hope wasn't just a bear she'd grown to love. She was David's legacy, his gentle soul given another chance to exist in the world. And Sarah would die before she let Dr. Webb destroy that gift twice. The coordinates led them to a clearing where 3 massive RVs formed a triangle around a field laboratory that looked like something from a disaster movie. Portable generators hummed ominously, powering banks of medical equipment that gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights strung between the vehicles. Sarah's heart shattered when she spotted Hope through her binoculars. The bear cub was unconscious, strapped to an examination table with IV lines running into her small body. "They've sedated her," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "She looks so small." Dr. Marcus Webb moved around the table with clinical precision, a man in his 60s whose silver hair and expensive suit seemed absurdly out of place in the swamp. Sarah recognized him immediately. The same gentle smile he'd worn while treating David, the same soft voice that had delivered devastating diagnoses wrapped in false hope. "That son of a bitch," she breathed. "He was David's doctor for 2 years. I trusted him with my son's life." Martha counted at least 12 armed personnel stationed around the perimeter. Military contractors by the look of them. "This isn't just some rogue research project, honey. This has government money behind it." Jake studied the setup through his own binoculars, noting the escape routes and weak points in their security. "They're preparing for surgery. See that equipment? Neurosurgical tools, brain imaging devices. Once they start cutting—" He didn't finish the sentence. "We need a distraction," Sarah said, her surgeon's mind automatically analyzing the situation. "Something big enough to draw most of their security away from Hope." Martha reached into her canvas bag and pulled out what looked like a small remote control. "William always said the best distraction is the one your enemy creates for themselves." What is that? The old facility has a propane storage tank that feeds the emergency generators. William rigged it with enough plastic explosive to level half the building, been waiting 50 years for someone to need it. Martha's weathered fingers traced the device lovingly. He said someday someone would need to burn that place down properly. Jake stared at her. You're talking about blowing up a government research facility. That's terrorism. Honey, what they did to those children was terrorism. What they're about to do to Hope is terrorism. Martha's voice carried 5 decades of suppressed rage. Sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to burn down its lair. A new voice crackled over Jake's radio, Dr. Webb's cultured tones carrying across the frequency. Morrison, I know you're listening. Your financial obligations to my organization remain in effect. Deliver the woman and the elderly witness and your debts will be forgiven. You have 10 minutes to decide. Sarah turned to Jake, studying his weathered face in the fading afternoon light. This is your chance. Now turn us in, save yourself, and walk away clean. Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching Hope's unconscious form through the binoculars. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. 5 years ago, I sold death disguised as a pet. That python killed Emma Rodriguez because I was too greedy to care about consequences. I've been trying to pay that debt ever since. He pulled out his cell phone and began typing a response to Dr. Webb. But some debts can't be paid with money. Some debts require you to choose who you want to be when it matters most. The message he sent was simple. Go to hell. Within seconds, Webb's voice returned, sharp with anger. Morrison, you've just made a very expensive mistake. Kill them all. The specimen is more important than witnesses. Armed men began moving toward their position with tactical precision. Sarah felt the familiar calm that had served her through countless emergency surgeries settle over her mind. Martha, how big will that explosion be? Big enough to make them think the whole place is under attack. Should pull most of their people toward the facility. Do it. Martha pressed the button without hesitation. 3 miles away, the night sky erupted in orange flame as the research facility's fuel storage exploded. The sound rolled across the swamp like thunder, rattling the windows of the RVs and causing every person in the clearing to turn toward the distant fire. Jesus Christ! One of the contractors shouted. We're under attack! Delta Team, Bravo Team, move toward the facility now! In the chaos that followed, 8 of the 12 security personnel ran toward vehicles, leaving only 4 guards around the medical area. Sarah watched Webb frantically trying to accelerate his preparations, knowing that his window of opportunity was closing. Now, Sarah whispered. Jake moved first, using his knowledge of python behavior to create a different kind of distraction. From his equipment bag, he pulled out a small speaker that emitted the distress call of a juvenile alligator, a sound that would draw every predator within a mile radius. Within minutes, the swamp around the clearing came alive with movement as real alligators began converging on the area. What the hell? One of the remaining guards shouted as a 12-foot gator emerged from the water near his position. Webb, we've got company! Ignore them! Webb screamed. The surgery begins now! I'm not losing another specimen! Sarah and Martha used the confusion to approach from the north side where Webb's medical equipment cast the deepest shadows. Sarah's heart broke all over again when she got close enough to see Hope clearly. The bear cub's breathing was shallow, her usually bright eyes closed, and someone had shaved a patch of fur from her skull in preparation for the procedure. My baby, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. What have they done to you? Martha placed a steady hand on Sarah's shoulder. She's still alive, honey. That's what matters. Now we get her out of here. Dr. Webb was preparing a surgical drill when Sarah stepped into the light, her hands raised but her voice steady. Marcus? He spun around, his face cycling through surprise, recognition, and finally cold calculation. Doctor, Sarah Mitchell. I wondered if you'd figure it out eventually. You always were too smart for your own good. Let her go, Marcus. She's just a bear cub. She's not worth destroying your career over. Webb laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. Not worth it. Sarah, this little creature represents the culmination of 20 years of research. Do you have any idea what we learned from your son's neural patterns? The capacity for empathy, for complex emotional reasoning, for genuine love. We transferred it successfully to an animal brain. Using David without my consent. Using his cancer treatments as cover to steal pieces of his mind. Your son was dying anyway. His neural patterns would have been lost forever. Instead, they live on in this remarkable creature. Webb's eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. Imagine the applications: soldiers with enhanced empathy to prevent war crimes, therapy animals with genuine emotional intelligence, medical research that could revolutionize treatment for autism and PTSD. And all it cost was my son's life and Hope's freedom. Small prices for revolutionary advancement. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. The same feeling she'd had in the operating room when a patient was dying and conventional methods weren't enough. Sometimes, saving a life required taking desperate measures. Marcus, do you remember what you told me when David was diagnosed? You said that medicine without compassion isn't healing, it's just elaborate butchery. Webb's hand tightened on the surgical drill. Compassion is a luxury we can't afford in cutting-edge research. Then you've forgotten everything that made you a doctor in the first place. Jake's voice crackled over a captured radio. Webb, you've got bigger problems than one bear cub. Those alligators, some of them are heading your way. Big ones. As if summoned by his words, a massive bull alligator emerged from the water at the edge of the clearing, its prehistoric eyes reflecting the harsh lights. The remaining security personnel began backing away, their attention divided between the human threats and the very real danger of 12-foot predators. Sarah, Martha's voice called softly from behind Webb. When I say duck, you duck. Dr. Webb spun toward Martha's voice just as the elderly woman stepped out of the shadows. In her hands was William's service pistol, steady despite her arthritis. You killed children, Martha said quietly. Stole their minds while their parents thought you were trying to save them. My William carried that guilt until the day he died. Mrs. Henderson, surely we can reach an accommodation. Duck, Sarah. Sarah threw herself across Hope's unconscious form just as Martha fired a single shot into the air. The sound scattered the remaining security personnel and sent Dr. Webb diving for cover behind his equipment. In the chaos that followed, Sarah began disconnecting Hope's IV lines while Jake appeared from the darkness with bolt cutters for the restraints. The bear cub was unconscious but breathing steadily, her small body warm and alive in Sarah's arms. We need to go now, Jake urged, but Sarah was transfixed by Hope's face. For just a moment, in the soft light filtering through the swamp, the sleeping bear cub looked exactly like David had on those peaceful mornings when Sarah would check on him before school. The same gentle expression, the same sense of innocence and trust. I've got you, baby, Sarah whispered. Mommy's got you. The escape boat's engine sputtered and died just as the first pursuing helicopter crested the tree line behind them. Sarah clutched Hope's unconscious form against her chest, feeling the bear cub's shallow breathing against her neck. The sedatives were wearing off, but Hope remained dangerously weak, her small body limp and unresponsive. Jake, get this engine started, Martha shouted over the growing roar of rotor blades. I'm trying! Jake's hands flew over the motor, but years of swamp water and neglect had finally claimed the old outboard. The fuel line's clogged. It's going to take time we don't have. The helicopter swept overhead, searchlights turning the dark water into harsh daylight. Sarah pressed herself and Hope deeper into the boat's shadows. But she knew it was futile. They were trapped in open water with nowhere to hide and no way to run. Dr. Webb's voice boomed from a loudspeaker mounted on the helicopter. "Dr. Mitchell, you're endangering that animal's life, and she needs immediate medical attention that only my facility can provide. Surrender now, and I'll ensure she receives proper care." "Liar!" Sarah screamed back, though her voice was lost in the mechanical thunder above. Hope stirred weakly in her arms, making small whimpering sounds that broke Sarah's heart. Martha reached into her canvas bag and pulled out what looked like a flare gun. "William left me one more surprise," she said grimly, "but using it means there's no going back for any of us." "What are you talking about?" Jake demanded, still working frantically on the engine. "That helicopter is flying below regulation altitude over protected wetlands. One emergency flare fired at their tail rotor and they'll have to make an emergency landing." Martha's weathered hands were steady as she loaded the flare. "But the FAA investigation will expose everything, the illegal research, the kidnapping, all of it." "You'll go to prison," Sarah said. "Honey, I'm 78 years old with a heart condition. Prison doesn't scare me nearly as much as watching that little girl die in your arms." Before Sarah could respond, a second helicopter appeared from the north, boxing them in completely. This one carried additional armed personnel, and Sarah could see them preparing rappelling equipment. Hope's eyes flickered open, unfocused and glazed from the sedatives. She looked up at Sarah with an expression of confusion and pain that was heartbreakingly human. The bear cub tried to lift her head, failed, and made a small sound that was unmistakably a cry for help. "Shh, baby girl," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy's here. Mommy's not going to let them hurt you anymore." The memory hit her like a physical blow, sitting beside David's hospital bed during his final night, holding his small hand while he drifted in and out of consciousness. He had looked at her with the same expression of trust and fear, believing absolutely that his mother could protect him from everything, even death. She had failed David. She would not fail Hope. "Martha, take the shot." "Sarah, no!" Jake grabbed her arm. "If we bring down that helicopter, people could die. Innocent pilots, crew members who are just doing their jobs." "Innocent?" Sarah's voice rose to a near scream. "They're about to kill the last living piece of my son. They stole David's memories, his capacity for love, and put it in this little bear. If Hope dies, David dies all over again." Jake stared at her, finally understanding the depth of her desperation. This wasn't just about saving an animal. This was about saving the last vestige of her child's soul. The lead helicopter began descending, its downdraft churning the water into violent waves that rocked their small boat. "Dr." Webb's voice crackled over the loudspeaker again. "You have 30 seconds to surrender before we take more aggressive action." Martha raised the flare gun, her arthritic hands trembling slightly as she aimed at the helicopter's tail section. "William, if you're listening up there, help me make this shot count." Hope suddenly convulsed in Sarah's arms, her small body going rigid as some delayed reaction to the sedatives kicked in. Foam appeared at the corners of her mouth and her breathing became labored and irregular. "She's going into respiratory distress." Sarah's medical training took over. "The sedatives, they've given her too much for her body weight. She's dying." Jake abandoned the engine and grabbed his emergency medical kit. "What do you need?" "Epinephrine, if you have it. Something to counteract the sedatives." Sarah laid Hope on the bottom of the boat and began chest compressions, trying to keep the bear cub's heart beating steadily. "I don't have epinephrine, but I have something else." Jake pulled out a small vial and syringe. "It's an antidote for snake venom, but it might work as a general stimulant." "Might work?" Martha demanded. "It's all we have," Sarah said, taking the syringe. "Hope, baby, stay with me. Please stay with me." She injected the antidote directly into Hope's chest, then resumed compressions. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours, nothing happened. Hope's breathing continued to deteriorate, and her small heart fluttered irregularly under Sarah's hands. Then, with a sudden gasp, Hope's eyes snapped open. She looked directly at Sarah and made a sound that was unmistakably recognition, not just of a familiar face, but of family, of love, of home. "That's my girl," Sarah sobbed. "That's my brave girl." The helicopter was now hovering just 20 feet above them, and armed men were preparing to rappel down. Dr. Webb's voice had lost all pretense of civility. "Final warning, Doctor." "Mitchell, surrender the specimen immediately or face the consequences." Martha's finger tightened on the flare gun trigger. "Sarah, honey, I need you to know something. What we're about to do. It's going to change everything. There's no going back to our quiet life in the swamp." "I know." Sarah held Hope closer, feeling the bear cub's strength slowly returning. "But sometimes the right thing and the safe thing aren't the same thing. William used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Martha's voice was steady now, resolved. "On 3. 1, 2. Hope suddenly lifted her head and looked directly at Martha, as if she understood what was about to happen. The bear cub made a soft sound, not quite human, not quite animal, that seemed to carry all the gratitude and love that words couldn't express. 3. The flare streaked across the water like a comet. The flare struck the helicopter's tail rotor in a shower of sparks. But instead of the catastrophic failure Martha had expected, the aircraft lurched sideways and began an emergency auto-rotation landing in the swamp about 200 yards away. Sarah watched in horror as the helicopter hit the water hard, sending up a massive splash that echoed across the wetlands like thunder. "Dear God, what have I done?" Martha whispered, the flare gun slipping from her trembling hands. Jake finally got their engine started, but instead of fleeing, he turned the boat toward the downed helicopter. "We have to help them. Pilot training teaches auto-rotation, but that was still a hard landing." "Are you insane?" Sarah clutched Hope tighter. "They were going to kill us." "The pilots are just doing their jobs, Sarah. They don't deserve to drown because of Webb's obsession." As they approached the crash site, Sarah could see 2 figures struggling in the water, the pilot and co-pilot, both injured but alive. The passenger compartment had taken the worst of the impact, and she watched with mixed emotions as Dr. Webb was pulled from the wreckage by his security team. He was conscious but clearly hurt, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. The second helicopter had landed on a nearby hammock, its crew rushing to assist with the rescue operation. In the confusion, no one paid attention to the small boat with 3 fugitives and 1 very special bear cub. Jake cut the engine and drifted closer. "Pilot's got a broken arm, maybe some internal injuries. The co-pilot looks like he's in shock." Sarah found herself torn between her hatred for Dr. Webb and her oath as a physician to do no harm. The Hippocratic Oath didn't come with exceptions for people who had destroyed your life. "We should go," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she was already reaching for Jake's medical kit. "Sarah, no," Martha warned. "If they see you, then they see me." Sarah handed Hope to Martha and slipped into the water. "I'm a doctor. I can't watch people drown, even if they're the enemy." She swam toward the injured pilot, her movements automatic despite the chaos raging in her mind. The man was middle-aged, probably someone's husband and father, trying to stay afloat with one arm clearly broken. His eyes were wide with pain and confusion. "I'm a doctor," Sarah called out as she reached him. "Let me help you." 20 yards away, Dr. Webb spotted her through the rescue chaos. "Sarah," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Thank God. The specimen, is she alive? Did the sedatives cause permanent damage?" Sarah's hand stilled on the pilot's injured arm. Even now, bleeding and half-drowned, Webb's first concern wasn't for his own people or the lives he'd endangered. It was for his specimen. "Her name is Hope," Sarah said coldly, fashioning a makeshift sling from torn fabric. "And she's not your specimen anymore." "You don't understand the implications." Webb struggled against his own rescuers, trying to reach Sarah. "That animal represents years of breakthrough research. The neural pathways we mapped from your son's brain patterns could revolutionize treatment for traumatic brain injury, autism, PTSD, using children's stolen memories." Sarah secured the pilot's arm and began helping him toward shore. "David was 8 years old. Marcus, 8. He trusted you. I trusted you. David was dying anyway. His patterns would have been lost forever." The pilot Sarah was helping looked between them with growing understanding. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "are you talking about medical experiments on children?" Dr. Webb's face went pale as he realized how many witnesses were now listening to his words. The rescue crew, the second helicopter's personnel, even his own security team, all of them hearing him discuss the illegal use of children's biological material. "That's classified information," Webb stammered. "This is a matter of national security." "Bullshit," said the co-pilot, who was being helped to shore by Jake. "I've flown medical transport missions for 15 years. What you're describing isn't research, it's theft." Sarah reached the muddy bank and helped the injured pilot to safety. As she worked, more of the truth began spilling out. Webb, desperate to salvage his operation, tried to assert his authority over the rescue personnel. "I'm ordering you to detain these individuals. They've stolen government property and interfered with a classified operation." The lead rescue technician, a weathered man in his 50s, looked Webb up and down with obvious disgust. "Mister, I've been doing search and rescue in these swamps for 20 years. I've seen a lot of crazy stuff, but I've never seen anyone call a bear cub government property." From the boat, Martha's voice carried across the water with surprising strength. "That man used children's medical records to conduct illegal experiments. My late husband documented everything 50 years ago, and I've got his evidence." Jake, who had been quietly supporting the injured co-pilot, suddenly straightened. "Mrs. Henderson, what did you just say?" "William kept copies of everything. Every document, every procedure, every child they used." Martha's voice grew stronger with each word. "He spent 40 years trying to find someone brave enough to expose the truth." Dr. Webb's face crumpled as he realized the scope of his exposure. Not only had his current operation been compromised, but decades of hidden crimes were about to come to light. "You have no idea what you're unleashing," he said desperately. "The families of those children, they never knew what we used their tissue samples for. This will destroy them all over again." "The families deserve the truth," Sarah said firmly. She looked back at Martha, who was gently stroking Hope's fur as the bear cub gradually regained her strength. "The children deserve justice." The rescue technician was already radioing for additional support, not just medical evacuation, but law enforcement. The phrase, "potential war crimes investigation," crackled over the radio frequency. Hope suddenly stood up in the boat, shaky but determined. She looked across the water at Sarah with an expression of such clarity and intelligence that even the rescue crew fell silent. Then the bear cub did something that made everyone's breath catch. She placed one small paw over her heart and extended the other toward Sarah in what was unmistakably a gesture of love and gratitude. "Jesus Christ," whispered one of the security contractors. "That thing's almost human." "She's not a thing," Sarah said fiercely. "She's Hope, and she carries the best parts of my son's soul." Dr. Webb made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "Even if you expose everything, it won't change what she is. That animal will never have a normal life. She's too intelligent to live in the wild, too dangerous to live with humans. She'll spend the rest of her days in a cage, one way or another." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow because she knew Webb was right. Hope's extraordinary intelligence made her unsuitable for release into the wild, but her size and strength would make most people afraid to accept her as a companion animal. She would indeed spend her life as an oddity, studied and confined by well-meaning but ultimately limiting human systems. Martha seemed to read Sarah's thoughts. "Honey, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is fight for someone's right to choose their own path, even if that path is difficult." As if responding to Martha's words, Hope jumped from the boat into the shallow water and began walking toward Sarah. Her movements were still unsteady from the sedatives, but her intention was clear. She wasn't fleeing to freedom or seeking safety. She was choosing her family. When Hope reached Sarah, she pressed against the woman's legs with the full weight of her small body, then looked up with eyes that held depths of emotion no normal bear could possess. In that moment, Sarah understood that David's capacity for love hadn't been stolen or perverted by the experiments. It had been given a second chance to exist in the world through Hope's remarkable heart. Dr. Webb watched the reunion with something like recognition dawning on his face. For the first time since the rescue began, he looked at Hope not as a specimen, but as a living being with her own will and desires. "She chose you," he said quietly. "After everything we did, all the conditioning and testing, she still chose you." "David always chose love over fear, too," Sarah replied, kneeling to embrace Hope properly. "Even when he was dying, he chose to trust, to hope, to care about others more than himself." The sound of approaching sirens echoed across the water, real law enforcement arriving to sort through the chaos of crashed helicopters, missing children's medical records, and one extraordinary bear who had just redefined what family could mean. 18 months later, Sarah stood on the wraparound porch of what had once been her childhood home in northern Georgia, watching Hope teach 3 rescued bear cubs how to fish in the pond behind the house. The morning sun painted everything golden, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt something that resembled peace. The legal battles had been brutal, but ultimately successful. Martha's cache of documents, combined with testimonies from the helicopter crew and rescue personnel, had exposed a network of illegal medical experimentation stretching back 50 years. Dr. Webb was serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison, and dozens of families had finally learned the truth about what had happened to their deceased children's biological samples. "Mom, look!" Hope's excited bark drew Sarah's attention back to the pond. The bear, now grown to nearly full size at 180 pounds, was patiently demonstrating to the cubs how to wait motionlessly for fish to swim within reach. Her technique was flawless, but what made Sarah smile was Hope's obvious joy in teaching. Jake emerged from the barn wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He'd sold his python removal business and now served as the sanctuary's wildlife coordinator, his expertise invaluable in caring for the dozens of rescued animals that called the property home. "The new enclosure is finished," he announced. "Should be perfect for that family of red foxes the state's sending next week." Sarah nodded, checking items off the ever-growing list of sanctuary responsibilities. What had started as a refuge for Hope had evolved into something much larger, a specialized facility for animals with unique behavioral or medical needs. The irony wasn't lost on her that they were doing the kind of legitimate research Dr. Webb had claimed to champion, but with full transparency and the animals' welfare as the primary concern. "Any word from the film crew?" Jake asked. Sarah grimaced. The documentary about Hope's story had brought unwanted attention, turning their quiet sanctuary into something of a tourist destination. While the increased donations were helpful, Sarah worried about the impact on Hope and the other animals. "They want to do a follow-up piece about Hope's mothering instincts with the cubs," Sarah said. "I told them no, she's not a circus act." Martha's voice called from the kitchen window. Breakfast is ready. And Sarah, honey, you need to see this morning's mail." At 80 years old, Martha had become the sanctuary's unofficial grandmother, moving permanently to the property after the trials concluded. She'd thrown herself into the work with renewed purpose, often saying that caring for the animals had added years to her life. Inside, the kitchen table was covered with letters from around the world, families wanting to donate, researchers requesting ethical collaboration, and children who had drawn pictures of hope after seeing her story on television. But the letter Martha held, separate from the others, made Sarah's breath catch. The return address read, Emma Rodriguez Memorial Foundation. "It came yesterday, but I thought you should read it when you were ready," Martha said gently. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Emma Rodriguez, the 4-year-old girl killed by Jake's python 5 years ago. The family Jake had destroyed through his greed and carelessness. Dear Ms. Mitchell, my name is Maria Rodriguez, Emma's mother. I have been following the news about your sanctuary and the bear named Hope. My husband and I would like to visit, if you would allow it. We do not come seeking confrontation with Mr. Morrison, though we know he works with you now. The legal proceedings resolved the criminal aspects of Emma's death, but our hearts have remained unhealed. We have spent 5 years consumed by anger and grief. But watching Hope's story, seeing how you transformed your loss into something that helps other creatures, we wonder if there might be a path forward for us as well. Emma loved animals. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Perhaps there is a way for her memory to help your work. We would be honored to meet Hope and to discuss establishing a memorial fund in Emma's name to support your sanctuary. If you are willing to see us, please let us know. With respect and hope for healing, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez. Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the letter's grace and courage. Jake, reading over her shoulder, had gone completely white. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't face them. Not after what I did to their little girl." "Maybe that's exactly why you need to face them," Martha said quietly. Running from guilt isn't the same as healing from it. Through the window, they watched Hope playing with the cubs, her joy infectious as she rolled in the grass with abandon. One of the cubs, the smallest and shyest, had attached himself particularly strongly to Hope, rarely leaving her side. Sarah had named him David, and the little bear's gentle nature reminded her so much of her son that it sometimes took her breath away. "What would Hope do?" Sarah asked suddenly. Jake looked at her in confusion. "What?" "If Hope were in your position, facing the family of someone she'd accidentally hurt, what would she do?" Sarah gestured toward the pond where Hope was now napping in the sunshine, surrounded by her adopted cubs. "She leads with her heart, always, even when she's afraid." Jake watched Hope for a long moment, seeing not just the remarkable animal she'd become, but the capacity for love that had survived despite everything she'd endured. "She'd face them," he said finally. "She'd trust that love is stronger than fear." Sarah picked up the phone and dialed the number on the letter. Maria Rodriguez answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Sarah Mitchell. We received your letter, and yes, we would very much like to meet with you." The conversation that followed was difficult but healing, filled with tears and apologies and the tentative beginnings of forgiveness. They arranged a visit for the following weekend, with the understanding that it might be painful for everyone involved. After hanging up, Sarah found Jake sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. "I keep thinking about Emma," he said. "How excited she must have been to get a new pet. How her parents thought they were giving her something wonderful. And now you have a chance to honor her memory by helping other animals live safely," Sarah replied. "That's not erasing the past, Jake. That's transforming it into something meaningful." Hope ambled up to the porch, followed by her 3 cubs. She looked at Jake with those remarkably intelligent eyes, then gently bumped his shoulder with her massive head. The gesture was unmistakably supportive, as if she understood his pain and wanted to offer comfort. "She forgives me," Jake said wonderfully. "After everything I've done, everything I've cost you, she still trusts me." "Hope carries the best parts of David's heart," Sarah said. "And David never held grudges. He believed people could change, could become better than their worst mistakes." As the sun climbed higher, they sat together on the porch. Three humans bound by loss and redemption, watched over by a bear who carried within her soul the eternal capacity for forgiveness and love. The Rodriguez family would visit next weekend, and together they would begin the next chapter of healing. Sarah looked at Hope, who was patiently allowing little David to climb on her back, and felt her son's presence in the morning light. Not as grief or loss, but as continuing love made manifest in the world through this extraordinary creature who had chosen to make their broken family whole again. "Thank you, David," she whispered. "Thank you for sending her to us." Hope looked up at that moment and made a soft sound that seemed to say, "You're welcome, Mom. We're home now. We're finally home." Dear friends, as we reach the golden years of our lives, we often carry wounds that seem too deep to heal. The loss of loved ones, regrets about paths not taken, guilt over mistakes we've made. Sarah's story with Hope reminds us that healing doesn't come from forgetting our pain, but from transforming it into purpose. At 52, Sarah had lost everything that mattered: her son David, her marriage, her sense of meaning. But through Hope, she discovered that love doesn't end with death. It finds new ways to express itself in the world. Martha, at 78, proved that our wisdom and courage matter more than ever in our later years. Her husband's guilt became her mission for justice. Jake learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about choosing who we become moving forward. Hope taught them all that broken hearts, when they heal, become bigger hearts, capable of loving more deeply than before. Sometimes our greatest losses prepare us for our most meaningful contributions. The sanctuary they built together became a place where wounded souls, both human and animal, could find family again. In our autumn years, we still have time to plant seeds of hope that will bloom long after we're gone. Let's connect in the comments below. What loss in your life eventually led to unexpected growth or purpose? Have you ever found healing through helping others who were hurting in similar ways?